Hey everybody, I'm Coach Loretta and I'm here with Coach Reese and we're here with the Dirt Trail Running Podcast, Coffee with Coaches. And today, last week we talked about all things Hennepin, and Hennepin is coming up on Saturday. I'm super excited to be tracking and following along with runners and a little sad inside to not be there, but I am sporting my new Hennepin shirt today, which I absolutely love. And so we're going to talk about, this isn't just for Hennepin, but that's kind of on our minds right now because that's the big race coming up for Ornery Mule racing. But today we're going to talk about, what to expect the unexpected in races, because we know things don't always go the way we want them in races, right? But they can be manipulated a little bit, right? So if we're prepared to expect the unexpected, we're going to have tools in our toolbox to be ready to adapt and be flexible and make changes and make things work. So today we're going to kind of go through a bunch of different scenarios and talk about that, and hopefully help you on your race day when you run into some kind of things that you need to troubleshoot. So Reese, before we got on, we were talking a little bit about your training, getting ready for Tunnel Hill coming up pretty soon. And, you're talking a little bit about being a little unmotivated. And I think that that's something that's really common as we're getting close to a race. We've had this big build. We're getting tired. We're putting in all kinds of miles. We're putting like everything we have into this big effort that's coming up. And sometimes you're feeling a little sluggish. So do you want to share a little bit about that? Because I think that listeners can have some good takeaways from it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm super excited for today's podcast too. I like the idea of like, what haven't you thought about for race day, yeah, but our previous conversation was more on, like your question of like, hey, like, how was your run this morning? Because we always banter and talk about like how our athletics is doing. And you were telling me a great story about how you're feeling so much better with your running and with your stride and with your health. And I was like, yeah, I'm kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum. Like, it was kind of tough for me to get out the door this morning. I probably made my girlfriend pretty mad. My alarm clock went off at 5, and then the snooze went off again at like 5:07. And I like to try to beat the alarm clock so that it doesn't wake her up. So I'll try to wake up at like 4:58, and like turn it off beforehand because I don't want to wake her up. But yeah, so if my alarm clock goes off twice in one morning, I know that she's not too happy with me. But yeah, I was in those 7 minutes, I was laying in bed thinking to myself, like, do I really want to go out today? Like, I'm kind of tired. Like, I could stay here for a little bit. And then I was trying to rationalize it myself. Like, yeah, is it like better to take a rest day right now? Like, should I not go out and run? Is that the smart thing to do? Like, especially if I'm this like not about it, because usually I just get out of bed and I'm like, let's go, and thinking back on like what I wanted out of the couple of weeks leading up to, Des Plaines River Trail, which is next weekend for me, right? So I'm about like 10 days away from my race. I knew that like between that race and Tunnel Hill, like there's only 4 weeks. I'm not going to get a lot of training in. It's going to be pretty much recovery and then just kind of getting the wheels back underneath me. So I thought to myself, you know what, like, this is still part of my training, is the 2 weeks before leading into Des Plaines River Trail. And then pretty much I'm going to take an aggressive taper the week before, just so I can try to get as much training for Tunnel Hill as I can before Des Plaines comes up. So I got up and I rationalized to myself. I was like, hey, like, I don't have to do my massive 20-mile loop that I usually do, because when you get 10 miles out and it's in a big 20-mile loop, it's like, you're kind of stuck. If you turn around and go home, it's 10 miles. If you keep going, it's 10 miles. If you try to cut it short, you're probably going to be adding distance anyways. So I have this 10-mile loop that I do in the morning time before work on days that I have to get up, and get to work by 7 a.m. And I was like, maybe I'll just do one of those and then just kind of freewheel it and see what I feel like doing afterwards. Maybe I only feel like doing a shorter, like 3-mile loop or a 5-mile loop, or maybe I just call it a 10, or maybe I do 2 10-mile loops, So I gave myself the option, to like, bail out after one loop or so, like, start the day, get my legs turning, because I do love starting my day that way, and by the time I got finished with one loop, like, I kind of shook off the non-motivation. I was like, you know what, like, my legs are feeling good. My body's feeling pretty good. My mind is still in it. I think sometimes like all of us have that feeling where it's like, your body might feel good, but mentally you're so cashed from like not sleeping that well, maybe fighting with your partner, maybe like having a crazy like school schedule with your kids, where it's like my body feels good, but like my mind is like, just stop and go to bed, But all systems were kind of go for me at that point. I was like, my legs feel good. My mind feels good. I'm having a good time. Like, I'm waving hi to all my friends in Barrington. Like, this is fun. So I just kept going. And, I think just having that option, like giving myself options and not telling myself like I have to do a 20 miler and just letting it like organically come, listening to my body, listening to my mind. Like, it made it a lot easier instead of starting the run at mile 1 thinking like I have to do 20 today. It's like, no, like I have to listen to my body, and I would like to get some running in, and I would like to get my longer run in today, because it's pretty much my last long run before Des Plaines River Trail. And that's my own personal anecdote of like, hey, like everybody's gonna feel at some point, like no matter how like motivated you think somebody is, like, sometimes the motivation's not there, and you just have to give yourself options. And like, I love running. I love being outside. I love, pushing my body and pushing my mind and trying to see what's possible. But at some point, like sometimes it just becomes a grind. It shouldn't be like that all the time. I don't think you should go through like more than a couple of days of feeling like you're in a grind, right? Because if we're pushing ourselves, like sometimes we do hit that point where it's like, oh man, I think I overdid it. And now I'm kind of like, lackluster on getting outside. But, it's totally normal to have those feelings. So I think just knowing who you are and like how you best respond to like going and being outside is a good idea. Because for me, if I would have told myself like, hey, I have to do this, I wouldn't have been into it, like I'd tell like, I would like 10 miles. And then if I finish, if it doesn't come, it doesn't come. My body doesn't want it. My mind doesn't want it. But, I tried and I succeeded. And I feel like that's kind of the common notion of like, most of us, is that like, it's not always easy getting out the door in the morning, but it's definitely worthwhile. And I've never had a run where I leave and come back and say like that wasn't worth it, So,
I love that. It kind of goes to the psychology of, I'm always having a lot of correlations between running and my background with special ed and working with small children, and choice is such a huge thing, even, in that realm, right? Because when you're told that you can only do this, it puts us in this position of maybe fight or flight, like, oh, we can't do this, versus saying, okay, you have a choice. You can do this or you can do this. And then it just settles so much easier on your mind to be able to deal with, and you end up making normally the best choice, right? By giving yourself a little bit of an option.
I think the autonomy for people, like whether you're like self-coached or you have a coach, is super big. So as a coach myself, like I really like working with my athletes and saying like, what do you like to do? What do you want to do? But then also like teaching them different principles of like, hey, this is how we structure the week. So that way you're prepared for your long run, or you're prepared for your speed run, or like, this is where we want to put strength training in your plan in conjunction with your runs. And then a lot of times my athletes will come back to me and say like, hey, like it's not happening today, like, is it okay if I move this run to this day? And, it's like, it's cool for me because I can already tell that my athletes are thinking like I do when I program their training, is like, okay, this isn't going to happen, but maybe if I tweak things around a little bit, we'll see what Coach Reese thinks. But like, it gives the autonomy on an individual just to like know that like, hey, here's the plan, but like, it's always modifiable. So like, if it doesn't happen, that's fine. It's not mileage lost. It's not workout lost. It's just like a continuation and a building on like, hey, what is your week going to look like? What is your day going to look like? So autonomy is super important. And personally, like I coach myself, and I feel the same way when I write my own training. Is I have this idea of what I want, but then when it actually comes time to get out the door, it's still got to be modifiable. So just like, I don't want to be telling my athletes, you have to do this. Like, I don't want to be telling myself I have to do this, So I feel like it's that kind of duality of having the plan, but knowing that you can alter it.
Right. I like that too. I'll have sometimes athlete will reach out kind of stressed, feeling like they can't make something work. And it's nice to be able to kind of give them that reassurance, how it's not written in stone. We can be flexible. We can move things around, and I feel like I often feel a sense of relief after they talk to me, and I've like, no problem. We can make some adjustments, and I think that we need to do that, because that's what life's about, is making adjustments and making things work in your schedule, or you're going to be miserable.
Yeah. So, but yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And it's funny because whenever we have our because usually we talk face to face once a week, and then we'll do a bunch of texting. So like when we get online before the show, like we always have these awesome conversations, and it's just like, whoa, pump the brakes, like save it for the podcast. So that was our conversation before the conversation.
Yes.
But okay,
So,
cool.
yeah.
The top, things that you haven't thought about for your A race. So for a lot of people, that's going to be Hennepin coming up, and we're going to be using Hennepin, like you said before, as that example to kind of explain some of these things, but like take these into your next races, take these ideas and these concepts, because like we do the best job that we can to physically and mentally prepare ourselves. And now these other things are kind of like logisticy type, like set yourself up for success types of things. And there's so much in ultra running that we should be thinking about and planning for, that like, how can you possibly think of it all at once? So this is just that reminder of like, hey, it's race week. Like, make sure that like you have an idea of what you're going to do for these things,
And hopefully today we can provide a little bit of nuggets of information, right, that you can store in that back of your brain. And when race day comes, and if something comes up, you're prepared for it, because we've kind of helped guide you along. Just think on your shoulder is Coach Loretta and Coach Reese carrying you through that race.
So
Maybe
yeah,
a meme with that.
give anybody pre-race anxiety. This is just like, hey, this is stuff that you can take care of in a matter of minutes once you've thought about it. So I guess the first one that I really like to think about is, what time is the sun setting? And that wraps into like, what is your headlamp strategy? Mm-hmm. And what is the weather going to be like at sunset? So like all of those things, because that dictates like, hey, like when am I going to need my headlamp? Like, for Hennepin, I'm looking at the 10-day forecast right now for Sterling, Illinois. We've got a high of 59, low of 42. It's going to be 75% humidity, which is pretty humid for a 60-degree day. But sunrise is going to be 7 o'clock in the morning, and sunset is going to be 6:19. However, it's supposed to be cloudy, right? So since we can't really know exactly how cloudy it is, it's definitely safe to say that you're going to need your headlamp well before 6:19. Because if it's very cloudy, if it's like overcasty, you might need it as early as like 4:30 or 5 p.m.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's sort of what got me at Hennepin. I think I mentioned it last week, was, I thought I would get to an aid station in time to get my headlamp before dark, and it got dark. I probably ran on a mile in a little bit darker than I would have preferred, and when that happens, of course, mentally, I'm like, oh, I can't see, like I'm slowing down, I'm starting to think about all of those things. Had I had thought of it ahead of time, I should have grabbed it at the aid station before, and I could have saved myself a lot of stress. So I think that that's really smart, like just planning ahead. They don't weigh a lot. So I could have grabbed it sooner, right? But I didn't. And so then I had to kind of navigate my way through. It ended up being just fine, but it could have been better, if I hadn't done that.
Yeah, for sure. And like you brought up two things that I really like to touch on for this subject. The first one being the stress of thinking, oh crap, I need my headlamp. I got to get to the next aid station, because that can ruin your pacing plan and can make you, and even if you're not going any faster, just that stress, elevating your cortisol, elevating your fight or flight response, increasing your breathing, increasing your effort in RPE. Like we don't want that. And the second thing is like the whole weight aspect. Like, don't be a weight weenie out there. Like if you're doing the 50 mile or the 100 miler, like it doesn't take up any like space in your pack, right? If you're doing the 100 miler and like you're finishing in like, like 24 to 30 hours, you're going to be outside with a headlamp on your head for like, 8+ hours or so. So what's an extra hour with that headlamp on your head, So hopefully by now you already have a strategy where it's not digging into your forehead like some headlamps can do, So putting it on for an extra hour and just letting it chill there on top of your head, like I feel like the weight, the stress reduction that you get far exceeds the weight that's going to be on top of your head, or the logistics of grabbing it like slightly early.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, like you said, though, I hope you've tested out your headlamps. If you haven't, you still have one night this evening and tomorrow morning, maybe to test it. I like to wear a bandana around my head so that it's not digging into my forehead. Ornery Mule has some pretty cool ones on their website. And then I will wear it with a hat, but it does distort the light a little bit. So, if you haven't thought about it and you're wearing a hat and then you put it on, it is a little bit different. I don't think you have as clear of a vision, in my opinion. I know some people are going to be wearing waist lamps or waistbands. So that's, a thing too. Just make sure you've tried it. You're ready to go with it.
For sure. Yeah. And then kind of that topic of like, what time is the sun rising and setting? As we get a little bit closer to the weekend here, we can actually see what what is the temperature going to be like? Because I think one of the things that always gets me is like when you look at the low temperature for the day, like you assume that it's going to be sometime in the morning, but it could also be sometime in the evening, because sometimes the day starts at like 60 degrees and then it just slowly tapers down and you get that low point at the very tail end of the day. So I think that that too, you know, like looking, if you're going to be out there for like 24 hours or so, you know, as the weekend comes closer, look at those graphs and just see what the ebb and flow is going to look like. And take into consideration, like, what is the morning, the midday, and the evening temp of both the day that the race starts on and the day that you're going to be finishing on,
Right.
you know?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think layers is always a safe way to go. You know, so things that you can take off very easily, quickly, even things that you can take off like sleeves or gloves or hat that you can take off on the fly while you're running, or a very light jacket that you can, you know, have wrapped around and put on and off. Things that you don't have to stop for, I think, are my go-tos, rather than having to stop and do an entire outfit change. I think that's the way to go, to be honestly. And my races, my hundreds, my 24-hour events, I have really don't change my clothes, right? So I may take some articles on and off, but I never do a full outfit change. So, you know, thinking about that, like, what do I have that I can put on that can be good? And I think for me, like, also morning of race, you know, I'm gonna probably, like, on a day like what's expected, I probably would start with shorts and a tank top. But going up to the race line, I would probably have maybe some pants over top and a shirt just to keep my muscles and warm. So I'm not going up to the line even chilled, right? And then right at the line, I'm taking my stuff off. If you have crew, that's really a great opportunity. If you don't, you know, you might have to rethink that, but that's I think a good way to go to the finish line feeling, or start line feeling, you know, good. And then as the day goes on, kind of being able to easily adjust. And then I always like at the finish line, it's always colder, right? Your body has now cooled down, you've been running all day, you've been sweaty, you've stopped running, and now you're getting cold. So I always like to have, you know, a hoodie and some pants. I like to have fuzzy slipper socks and my UFOs to put on immediately at the finish line. Like that, there's nothing better than being able to have that right afterwards. I'm always a little bit cold. And I'm a person that usually is hot all the time, but at that point, it's late at night, I'm cold, you know, from, you know, just that drying sweat. And that's what I love.
Yep, that's fantastic. And I do like the idea too of like, you know, what does temperature feel like when you've been physically exerting? You know what I mean? Because when you're done, like, I'm sure there's a bunch of people out there that are listening to this and are like, yeah, like I finished 50s and 100s before. And, you know, like when it's like a warm summer day, we don't necessarily take a look at what the temperature is when we finish. But like, you know, if it's going to be like a high of 60 and a low of 40 for Hennepin start and finish, like, you're going to be running through the day, getting sun exposure when it's 60. And then by the time it dips back down to like 40 degrees, it's going to feel really cold, you know, like it's going to feel freezing. So like, you can only take your perception of temperature like validly at the start of the race, right? Like if it's a 40 or a 50-degree start, like I kind of know how my body's going to feel because I'm used to starting my runs and it's 40 and 50 degrees. I'm not used to finishing 100-mile runs when it's like 40 degrees, you know? So I think, like you said before, like having those options and those layers is huge. And bonus points if you can make those layers like multifunctional. Like say if you have arm sleeves and you can do some cooling during the day, but then there's like warmth in the evening time. Or if you have some, you know, a lot of people have problems with their fingers. If you have some lightweight gloves that you can use most of the time and they clasp together. So maybe you don't put them in your pack if your pack is already full, but you can tag them outside of your pack for like easy storage and deployment. Like that's awesome. Maybe you're planning on using poles and you have slight hand problems. So maybe you kind of double up and get those gloves that, you know, don't have fingers on them. So that way they're not too hard or too hot during the day, but they're also not too cold during the evening time. So switching out pole gloves for like warmer gloves, things like that. So like finding any way that you can to like double up all of your gear just means you're packing less, and then there's less to change in and change out of when you're actually going through aid stations.
And I think people are always kind of like, oh, what do I wear to start the race? Because it's going to be cold and it's going to change the temperature. I mean, a rule of thumb for me is I want to feel a little bit chilly when I start on the start line. I don't want to feel comfortable, because if I'm comfortable standing there, I'm going to be hot as soon as I start running. So, I want to feel a little bit chilly if that's possible at all, right, for that start. So I'm going to probably dress a little bit lighter. Sometimes I see people on the start line like way overdressed, and because shortly in they're peeling clothes off because they overheated. And I think that's a big thing with rate of perceived exertion too, is that overheating factor. It's going to raise your heart rate. It's going to make you start feeling fatigued because you're already sweating so early on, just because of a clothing thing that you could have maybe prevented.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just like that piles fatigue and stress onto your body at the start of an already long day. So like finding that way to like try to keep that comfort throughout the entire day is going to be important. And I'm totally on that camp too. Like I like starting cold for ultras. It's different if you're racing shorter, because like, if you're racing like a 5K or a 10K or a half marathon or even a marathon, like you want to be warmer because you're going to be starting pretty hard from the get-go. So you want like your Achilles tendon and other tendons and ligaments and soft tissues to be warm, and for your muscles to be warm so that they're well oxygenated and ready to go, But with ultras, like if you're racing like a 50 mile or a 100 mile, like you got some time to warm up into it, So like rarely in a 50 or 100 miler are people like, sub 7 minute pace or sub 6 minute pace or like whatever it is, like right from the start, where like the benefits of being warmer outweigh the benefits of being colder. So I think that's where like, just me thinking about it right now and going on a train of thought, I'm like, yeah, there's two different positions, like David Roach is a huge fan of like the cooling strategies beforehand. But then if you're really cold at the start of an ultra or a race, it's like you have less oxygenation to your muscles. But again, like I don't think that we're starting so hard that it's going to negatively like impact.
You have time to warm up. Yeah, because you're going out at a lower effort, in an ultra. Yeah, I think that's a good point. When we're talking about clothing, I think we need to make sure we mention this, because this can be something that can ruin your race, is making sure that you're using chafing cream, whatever you're using chafing cream. So me, morning of race, maybe this is going to be too detailed, but before I even get dressed, I am putting it all over me. So I am not having to worry about going around my clothing. So I have it really well on my skin and the areas that I know that I'm going to chafe. Some spot I sometimes forget is under my arm. Weirdly, I will chafe under there, and that will be my spot that I may forget to do. But on race morning, I'm really diligent about slathering that on all over. And then I take my clothes and I take the stick, I use squirrel's nut butter, and I line every seam of my clothes, my sports bra, my shorts, and then I put it on. So now I have it on my skin, I have it on my clothing, and even on race morning, I do my feet. I'm on a normal running day, I do not do that, but on race day, I'm just extra cautious, put it between my toes, put it on my feet, put on my socks, and then I'm all covered. So, and then I also recommend carrying some with you, because nothing's worse than getting a rub and having to wait till the next aid station to fix it, because that can be a maker or breaker of your race day, right? So if you have it with you, it's going to, even though it's going to take a little bit of time, it's going to be worth that few minutes of time to grab out your chafing stick and, put some on in the spot that's getting hot.
Yep. And I would add to that too, because I've made the mistake. Open up your chafing cream and just see what the consistency is before packing it in your bag. Because I've had, those little like squirrel's nut butter, like lip balm ones, like love the product. It's great. They're doing a fantastic job. But I've had that same thing unopened for probably like 3 or 4 years. It's one of those little like complimentary ones you get in like
you're talking about, and they get really hard if they've been sitting.
I've always packed it. I've never really used it. And then like during kettle this past year, like I had to use some, and it's like you open it up and it's like hard as a rock. Else to do. So yeah, test the product. Don't just assume that, like it's the way that you remember it. So don't let it get too old.
Great tip. That was definitely an unexpected for you.
So, okay. So next topic, I really like this one is, like things that people are forgetting, motivational reminders of trusting your training. So like when you're a week or 2 weeks out, it is so easy to get wrapped up in like, oh my gosh, like, I don't feel like I'm ready enough. Like I'm not recovering well enough. Like this 3-mile shakeout that I just went on yesterday, like didn't feel right. So my race this weekend is like all bummed out, things like that. But I think that like what we forget or what we're not thinking about during our, like week beforehand race preparation are all of the workouts that we crushed that should give us, motivation going into the race. All the things that make you remember, like, I am prepared, what does that bring to mind for you?
Well, actually, it brings to mind, I went on a run last night with one of my athletes. He's preparing for a javelina. And we were just kind of having that conversation about, how are you feeling about, you have about 3 weeks out. And we just kind of went through all of the key points of his great training that has happened over the last several months, right? And pointing those out just to remind you, because sometimes we only remember the hard stuff. We forget the workouts that we really crushed and the things that are going well, the nutrition and hydration that you've been practicing so much that's falling into place, your pacing that's going well, you're getting faster, you're feeling stronger, fitter, all those things we sometimes forget. So we had that conversation. And then I said, what's your one concern about this race? Like if there's something that you're concerned about, and of course the heat, right? Because that's an unknown. We're coming from Michigan. He's going to Phoenix. And I'm like, well, I think the way we address that is you are ready, because we've talked about all of those things, right? You have cooling strategies ready and in place. You've been doing some heat acclimation. So you're doing everything that you can to get ready for this day. So all those things are happening. There are certain variables we can't control, but we can control how we respond to them.
Absolutely. My favorite thing to do is when I'm thinking about somebody's, somebody's specific build for a particular race. I'm thinking of one athlete in particular. His name's Kirk. He absolutely crushes like all the workouts I give him. He's a great guy, and a great husband, a great runner, a great race director. He's out in Indiana. And so like in the past couple weeks, I've been thinking to myself, okay, what are going to be the cruxy moments of his race? What are going to be the points where you look at like an elevation profile and you're like, oh crap, those moments where your physical and your mental will are going to be challenged in the race because of the course. And I'll design like workouts around that. Like, and then when I give it to somebody, I'll say like, hey, this is going to mimic like, your mile 12, like hill. And then this one is going to mimic your mile 62, like monster climb, so that way, like when we build up and do those workouts and they crush those workouts, and now it's a couple weeks later, maybe they forgot that they crushed that workout. I can go and remind them and say like, hey, like you've got a week or two before your race, like the hay is in the barn. You're good to go. Just float through these next couple weeks, get some miles under the legs, make sure you're recovering, getting some extra sleep, feeling good. But remember, you absolutely demolish these other workouts in training. So like you are ready for that crazy climb at mile 12. Like you are going to hammer up that crazy ascent at mile 62, especially like, those key points where it's like, in a 100-mile race at mile 62 to have such a gnarly climb, you've already gone so far. Like if you're in mile 62 in any 100, it's tough just because you're most of the way through the distance, but you're still nowhere near the finish line. And now all of a sudden you have like a wall of a mountain in front of you, So I think that like reminding yourself of those things, a couple other athletes like racing Hennepin, it's like, hey, remember you crushed these back-to-back workouts. Like you absolutely hammered like the tempos that I threw at the beginning of your long run. And then the pickups that you were supposed to do afterwards, just to mimic like, closing with efficiency and closing fast. Like those are the big reminding yourself of. So that way, like, yeah, like when it gets difficult, I've been here before in training. This isn't new. I got this.
Yeah. Another thing, I had a conversation with one of my athletes who's preparing also for Hennepin, and she's been doing a lot of visualization and has this amazing board where she's actually drawn visualization, things to remind her of different things. She's been on the course, so she's doing really great things to prepare. And we talked a little bit about that too, I also like to think about different parts on the course and where I feel good and I'm feeling so good and I visualize that. But then I also like to look at parts on the course where I think I'm not feeling so good. How am I going to get through it? So I like to play that over in my head. Like, okay, I'm kind of at a low. What do I need to do? How am I going to get out of this? Kind of thing. So there's still a few days left, to be kind of thinking about that. It's nice to take a little quiet time by yourself and think that. And it's not too late to look up some videos if you have an upcoming race this weekend of the course, to be thinking about it. So you have those visuals in your head and getting through. And we do have a episode on YouTube where Coach Scott took one of our athletes, Isla Allen, through a visualization. So that might be something to think about too. You know, you can check that out, and it gives you another reference of kind of getting through some of those hard spots.
Yep, absolutely. That like visualization is huge. Like when workouts are going really well, visualize yourself crushing that race. When workouts are going really bad or they're not going as planned, or maybe you go out for your easy run and you're like, ooh, I kind of feel worked today. Use that time as visualization for when things get tough. We do these things because it's going to get tough at some point. Nobody completes a 50 mile or 100 mile thinking like, yeah, that was nice. That was okay. I got it. You know, like you're going to have these highs of like, I feel amazing. Like I'm running with my friends. All I have to do is be outside all day. And then you're going to have terrible lows where you're like, my back hurts and like this sucks. And I just threw up and everything's going down. But you know, when you can pull yourself out and say that like, hey, like, you know, I've already thought about this and I've thought about like, how am I going to handle these low moments? So that way, like, you're not scrambling when it actually happens to you, or you're not taking it as like a devastating race, you know, like then that's ultra is really about, is expecting the highs, expecting the lows, and preparing for both of them.
For sure. And I think that, you know, when we're talking about motivation, I think it would be really good to also to make sure, I mean, we mentioned this last week, but I just want to say it again, make sure your crew knows what is motivational and not motivational for you. Because the worst thing is to be told something that makes you angry versus something, you know, like maybe you don't like that cheerleader, like just stop it, you know, especially when you're tired, it can annoy you a little bit more. So making sure your crew knows like, this is what motivates me and this is what not motivates me. Maybe you have some phrases, you know, mine is just smile, relax, and run. Maybe there's something you have that carries you through what, you know, stay in the mile you are, one more mile, whatever it is, have that available to pull, you know, and have your crew know that, because that might be a good reminder for you, because you may forget that mid-race when you're exhausted, you know. So I think those kind of things can really help motivate and pull you through too. Again, we've mentioned before, but you know, sometimes you dedicate miles to certain people and you're thinking about them on that run, you know, to get you through to the next run. You know, there's just different ways that you can motivate yourself, but something to think about.
Absolutely. Something else to think about. Are there bugs on course? Are
Yes.
there like what are those tangential things that don't relate to the elevation profile or the setting of the sun, or these course conditions that can, like, you know, definitely impact your race? I think, you know, Kettle is pretty known. It could be like, you know, a pretty bug-free year, or it could be absolutely terrible with horse flies and deer flies and mosquitoes. Same thing with like, you know, Midwest states, like, you know, what's the bugginess of the course and how do you prepare for that? Like some people will put little stickies on the back of their hats. Some people will wear like longer sleeved clothing, but that's not too hot, like sun sleeves or something like that.
Some people put dragonflies on there. Is it dragonflies to get rid of some sort of deer fly, I think?
Oh, really? So like just like a pin or something?
Like it kind of like hangs from them. Yeah.
That's awesome. So if you see anybody with dragonflies on the back of their hat, maybe they've thought about this. And this one's more Hennepin specific, but you know, like walnuts on the course. Like there's certain sections where like, yeah, there's some walnuts and like it's not devastating to the race, but you know, there's a couple people that I've heard, you know, complain that like, oh, the race was awesome, but like in a couple of sections, these darn walnuts, I almost twisted my ankle on them, you know. So, you know, just a quick reminder to do all your strength training and all your responsiveness training. Pick up your feet and just kind of know that like, hey, there might be some points where you have to pay attention to where your feet are landing. It is flat, it is fast, it is very non-technical, but every once in a while we do have to be zoned into our landing.
Yeah, and I think that is something when we mention Hennepin specific, is it's relatively flat, so may get a little bit lazy and not lifting your feet as much as you need to. But you know, being aware of your surroundings and keeping an eye on your footing is smart in every race, right? So that you don't run into an issue. So, but it's very minimal out there, but you may see some. And you know, it's nature. That's why we love to be out there. If we could remove all of that, then what fun would it be?
Absolutely. Another important question just from a mountain race I ran. Will there be bushwhacking? Like, take a look at other people's race reports, see if there's anything about like, you know, like some trails that are overgrown or something like that. I did most of Wasatch last year, and like everybody knows, I like to go as minimal as I can. I don't like to wear too many clothes, and I definitely got ripped up in some spots just passing a bunch of brush and shrubbery and stuff like that. And like, no, it doesn't like take out your race at all, but yeah, it does sting a little bit when you start to sweat profusely, so.
And I also think, like, speaking of bushwhacking, I've been in a race where that's what I did, and I was covered in poison ivy for a few weeks afterwards. So being smart about that, like if you're in a situation like that, making sure that you're cleaning yourself as soon as you can after the race to maybe try to avoid the poison ivy getting it.
I think that just like, getting as much information, like be a student of the sport, be a student of the race. Take a look at what other people have written about it. Look at some other like high points, low points. Like YouTube is awesome because there's so many videos out there about every race that it's like you can go on to Crispy Dumplings, his YouTube right now, and you can get a great Hennepin video and just like see what most of the course is going to look like. Like be a student, like you spend all this time training, like try to be as prepared as you can, like, mentally for those other factors of the course that may or may not play a factor into your day.
Yep.
And then I think too, kind of like we touched on in previous podcasts, like which way is the sun coming from? Last year for Hennepin, I wore a hat and I didn't wear sunglasses, and I thought to myself, if it gets pretty sunny, like I'll just dip it down like I usually do. But the problem is like you're near water most of the day, so you're going to get some of that sun reflecting back up. So most of the time I was, hat down like this, but still squinting. And I think that like that squintiness and then that fatigue on your eyes itself, I would like to see a study done on this. Is fatigue on your eyes playing an overall role in your rate of perceived exertion?
Oh, interesting.
This a bunch, and like getting light from everywhere. Like my face is tired, my eyes feel like they're sunburnt. Like it's got to play in a factor to like your overall rate of perceived exertion. It has to.
Yeah, that's some interesting things. So I think this is something that's could be something you really want to think about too if you wear contacts. So I wear contacts. I always like to have an extra pair in my pack so that if I need to change them, because you just never know. You touch your eye, you rip a contact, whatever. It's nice to have another pair. Sometimes later in the day, your eyes are starting to dry out. So it's nice to have a fresh pair as well. So thinking about that is good. I don't expect it to be buggy at Hennepin, but other races could be buggy. And I have had a problem where I've gotten, a bug that flew in my eye under my contact, so if I'm out on a night that I think, or in an area that I think it's going to be buggy, then I'll wear like the clear lens sunglasses just to protect that, and then I also, some people laughed when I've been at races and they've watched, I'll have sunglasses on late at night. And the reason I do that is because if it's starting to get windy, I don't like that feel on my contacts because it's drying my contacts out, so things to think about, when you're doing that, like, how am I going to handle that? Is that something that bugs you? Maybe I'm just hypersensitive, but, something to, think about.
Absolutely. I never thought about that because I don't wear contacts.
Yeah.
Huge. Excuse me. Okay. Another one, I guess, I just thought about this because as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about my races coming up. Driving fatigue, like, do you want to get there the morning of, or do you want to get there the day beforehand? Just so that way, like, you can have time to unpack, relax, say hi to your friends, go to the expo, go to the packet pickup, whatever it is. But also driving fatigue in the sense of like, like we're going to be staying about like 25 minutes away from where Tunnel Hill is. So when I'm looking at the directions, I'm trying to see like, are those roads typically, like I'll go onto Waze or something, are those roads typically busy at that time, or are they not? Because I don't want to get stressed like going to a start. The last race, the worst race I've ever been stressed for was the Frozen Otter in 2020. It was just before the shutdown of the world. And there was a snowstorm that was going throughout the entire evening. And you can bet that's not going to stop Frozen Otter. I think it's under new ownership. It's called something else now. I think it's called like Frigid Fox or something. But I ended up having to get up at like 3:00 in the morning to spend an hour shoveling out the driveway so I could pull out in the first place. And then it took another like hour and a half, 2 hours to get to the race start when it should have only taken like 45 minutes, and all of that stress just to get to the starting line. By the time you're sitting there and the gun goes off, it's like, oh my God, I'm so tired. Like I need a nap at the start, So, and that's an extreme example, but maybe just take into consideration, like, am I going to have to drive into like downtown? Am I going to be coming out of downtown? What time is it going to be? Like, what type of roads am I going to be driving on? And maybe get a driver, get an Uber, get somebody to, drive you to the start. So that way you're not having to spend that emotional energy before you're about to spend a ton of emotional energy.
Sure. You're starting to make me anxious just thinking about it. That's the biggest stress for me on race morning. I like to have the least amount of stress on race morning as far as transportation, because that can be like, I'm like, what if something happens and we're running late? What if we get there, the parking is really busy? I mean, like I like to really have that all really well planned out. So I think that that's smart. Personally, me, I like to get there at least a day, if not a 2 days, depending on if it's a big, A race, 2 days before, especially if it's a lot of travel that's involved, just to get my legs so they're not been sitting in a vehicle or flying or, for an extended amount of time, just so I can, move a little. I think that also the day before is a nice time to, if you can get out, like if we're talking about Hennepin, getting out on the canal and doing just a couple miles just to get your legs, loosened up on, the day before the race, a few strides, just feeling loose and fresh. So you're not too stiff from that travel time, I think is good too. And then when we're talking about travel, I think it's also important to talk about what am I going to do after the race? I've watched a video before about how dangerous it is to drive after these big ultras. If you've just finished a 100-mile race and you plan on driving several hours home, it might not be a good idea. I think it was compared to impairing your driving as much as drinking alcohol. You're tired after these races. So plan ahead and be safe. It might be better to spend the extra money or sleep in your car, to get a nap before you head out.
Yeah. And speaking of like what you're going to do after the race, like, what are you going to do for recovery after the race? Like, it sounds so obvious, like, duh, like, of course I'm going to like do something for recovery afterwards. But I don't think there's ever been an ultra that I have like ended and had like a plan of like, oh, like I have this protein shake, or I have this like meal that I pre-prepare and then, take to the event or so. For Kettle this past year, like, that was just so not even on my radar. Like, we packed food and we brought some food and stuff like that. But like, my mom and her husband ended up meeting me at the finish line, and they had this amazing like potato stew with like meat and carrots and all of that. And I was like, this is amazing. Like it's nourishing, but also like not just recovery, but like we were talking about before, what are you going to wear afterwards? Like, a lot of people don't want to be sitting in their running clothes for a super long time. So like just knowing like, hey, what does my 2 hours after I finish the race look like? Because quite honestly, like, we don't finish these races and then go right to the hotel and go to bed. It's like we're recovering, we're talking, we're around the atmosphere. Maybe we take a nap under a tree or something like that. But, have some like a palatable type of protein and carbohydrate like ready for you, and have some comfortable clothes. Because I mean, like, like you being in your recovery, are there recovery sandals?
Yeah, the UFOs. Yeah, I love to have those. So post race for me looks like protein shake being handed to me at the finish line, because I'm most likely not going to really want solid food, but I will do liquid. And so I know if I get that in, that's the best thing for me to get some, nutrition in right away. I like to put on a hoodie, some pants that I can slip on very easily over top, and some cozy slipper socks, my UFOs. Normally I also have some of the compression boots. I have Air Relax. So if I'm going to be driving back, 30 minutes or so to a hotel, I'll plug those right into my car and I will put those right on my legs right away. I get back to wherever I'm going, and a nice Epsom soak bath has been drawn for me. And I soak with a some kind of electrolyte drink or water, to stay hydrated, because, you're already going in dehydrated. So you want to be really careful if you take an Epsom soak right after, because it can dehydrate you. And then after that, then maybe I've got an appetite. So it's time to, get something to eat at that point. If I'm running a race like 100 or 24-hour, I often will also keep my legs a little bit elevated after the race to kind of minimize swelling. Some people like to put on compression socks or compression pants to minimize swelling as well, especially even the next day. Let's say you stay the night and the next day you're traveling a long ways home, you might notice riding in the car that things are starting to swell up. So some compression can also help you. And it's also important in those next couple days to keep up on electrolytes, because we really have probably depleted ourselves at some level, even though we're trying to keep up on our nutrition. Getting that back in is also going to aid in your recovery, I think, as well. So my last, I guess a couple of races ago, I finished at the 100 and there was no food at the finish line. I was starving, even if you have a protein shake, sometimes you want food, right? And it was late at night. And so my crew was very nice and searched out like a Denny's that happened to be open all night and brought food. But, it's like, I wanted food like right then, and there was nothing there. So you never know at the end of a finish line if there's going to be food or not, or you don't maybe know what the food is. Maybe it's something that you just really can't. Maybe it's pizza and it doesn't feel good, or maybe it's chili that doesn't sound good to you at the end of the race. And then, so be prepared and think about what could you pack to at least have a little bit until you can get somewhere and get something, because you could be literally finishing at 2 a.m. and nothing's open.
Absolutely. And I think too, like with the finish, let your crew know like what you're going to need at the finish, or like, emotionally and supportively, like, what are you going to need at the end of the race? Some people want to be held. Some people want to be, some people want to be helped. Like, hey, can you just like stay next to me and help me up and down and stuff like that? I'm definitely not that person. And it drives me crazy when people try to like do things for me. And it's like, no, I know that I just ran 100 miles, but I can get up and down on my own. I can go to the bathroom on my own, So it's one of those things where, we all tell our crew like what we need during the race, but then let them know that like, hey, like this is what so that way you don't sound rude or you don't sound inappreciative. Or if you need help and nobody's around, nobody's like, like next to you by your side, you're not like, hey, where's my crew at? So I think that'd be a great option.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay. So one more topic that I definitely wanted to cover is to pack or not to pack TP. I think that's kind of the discussion that nobody wants to have, but being on course is definitely a reality for a lot of us. So, and most of us kind of know like, man, like I usually have to go at some point during my long runs. So maybe then you are that person that needs to be packing your TP. And I personally really like the leave no trace principle. I'm not always the best at practicing it, but I think especially with like, with going to the bathroom on trail, if you're going to pack some TP, triple bag it. So that way you have a couple bags on you so that, you have your toilet paper in one stash, and then you have a bag for your used toilet paper in another stash. And then you have an overall bag that can contain all of it. So it's not, around your food in your pack. So, I think that like having one baggie with TP in it isn't enough. And with that too, just like, how do you go to the bathroom on the trail? Loretta, are you aware of kind of like common guidelines or principles of like, how to choose your spot to go to the bathroom?
No, but I would love to hear them, because, I've been in races that we're right on the trail and men are just standing right on the trail, right where I'm running and going to the bathroom. And I just don't think that is like, I'm like, I wouldn't be standing there doing that, so like get off the trail a little bit. So yeah, tell.
Yeah. Especially for like sustainability and leave no trace principles, is make sure that you're not on the trail and you're more than 100 foot away from a water source. So at Hennepin, this is going to be kind of tricky because the water source is right next to you. So you're going to have to hike in quite a ways, which nobody really wants to do. I think the guidelines are a little bit more relaxed if you're just taking a number one on the trail. In that case, like definitely don't do it on the trail because nobody wants to be running through it. Nobody wants to like sneak up on you while you're going either, so maybe hike in a couple trees deep into the woods, or, find like a more secluded spot where you can go and keep looking around to see if somebody's coming up on you. But otherwise too, when you pick your spot for a number two, you do want to dig down a good ways. I believe it's about like 6 inches or so. I could double check that real quick. But you do want to dig down. You don't want to leave your toilet paper on the ground. And you do want to bury it when you're done too.
Yeah. And I mean, most races, the aid stations are fairly close together. When we're thinking about Hennepin, it's pretty close. You probably hopefully won't have this issue, and you'll be able to make it to a porta potty that's at the aid station. But sometimes there's emergencies.
Yeah. So I just checked, and the holes that you should dig should be between 6 to 8 inches. And that, like while you're digging, it seems like quite a ways down, but you should be at least 100 foot away from a water source as well. So in that case, usually, since it's so intrusive to your race to be going in the middle of the woods, if you can hold it, you probably should, just because then you're not going to have to mess around with all of that. My personal anecdote for kettle is, I think, so I finished at about like 9:30 p.m. and I had to go from 3 p.m. until 9:30 p.m. And I kept telling myself, I kept playing a mind game with myself, like, just get to the next aid station. If you still have that feeling, go, be quick about it, and then get back on the trail. But the hard thing is that every time I got to an aid station that had a porta potty like right next to the trail, I didn't have to go. So you might have to play those games with yourself. But again, that's kind of where training comes into play too, is like, going back to those experiences that you have where it's like, yeah, I had to go, but I wasn't able to go, and knowing that like you can come out of those circumstances on top and not with a mess all around you. So
Right.
That's definitely something to consider before your trail running event. So, and that we've missed too. I mean, this is like a very small list of things that like, people should be considering and thinking about for their race too. But I do think that some of these things, especially the first couple that we talked about, as far as like sunlight, temperature, weather conditions, bugs on the course, which way is the sun coming from, like all those things are pretty important and can make or break your race, or at least make them tougher. So
Right. We do have a blog that has an ultra marathon checklist. So if you're wondering if you've forgotten something, you could double check that and see if there's something on that list that maybe that you want to, and that you didn't think about bringing. That would be a good thing to do a last minute check before you're off to your race.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you want to add, Loretta, or do you think we got through them all pretty well?
I feel like we covered them pretty well, but I mean, I guess the thing I want to say is we could never possibly cover everything. You could never possibly cover everything, because we can't plan for what might always go wrong at an ultra, but we can try to cover as many, things as we can. And if you haven't planned for it and you come up on it, don't panic. You use your resources, your tools in your toolbox to figure your way through, and you'll be fine.
Absolutely. Adaptability, resourcefulness, ingenuity. We should all be practicing those things. And that's something that we always talk about on this podcast, is when it comes down to it, you can be prepared all day long, but your ability to adapt and overcome is going to be the best thing come race day.
Right, for sure. And I guess one other thing I think that's important is we just never know quite when you might start to feel low or in a race, and it might kind of throw you off. It could come early. Just know you can get through that. What goes down is going to come back up, right? You're going to have waves of highs and lows throughout the day. If you keep your nutrition and hydration balanced as much as possible, hopefully it will leave that to a minimum. But don't panic yourself if you get into that situation. Just kind of take a deep breath and go. If you get to a spot where you're feeling like that, and you're feeling like I can't finish and I'm gonna DNF, give yourself time to regroup. Breathe, get yourself back together, and try going again, rather than just calling it a day, too soon. Unless of course you have an injury or something, think about that. And then one other thing that expected or unexpected you're going to see are chairs. Stay away from them. Stay away from the chairs. They will suck you in, and they're really hard to get out of, and it's a lot harder to move once you've sat down.
That's right. So to all athletes running Hennepin this weekend, good luck. We're thinking about you. Go OMR. You guys are going to have fun. You've prepared for this. You're ready for this. Keep your head in the game, and go have fun.
Oh, one last thing I'm going to share is there's trackers at these big races. There's always trackers, but they're not, 100% accurate. It's pretty difficult, in these big long races to have really solid tracking. So if you're watching or following a loved one, or your loved ones are following you, make sure to tell them that sometimes it's a little bit delayed. Don't panic too much, because it just might not be up to date at that moment. And that's just kind of something we expect when we get into these big ultras, I think.
Yep, absolutely.
So, all right, we'll see you guys next week.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye, everybody.